I know this franchise was started before I was born, but for whatever reason, I have really attached myself to it, and I love it for all kinds of things. And when I found out that this existed, day made. Hi guys, it's April, and I'm gonna do this review the same way I do all of my other reviews. I'm gonna have the non-spoiler section up front, followed by the spoiled filled dump afterwards, in case you don't want to spoil yourself. But by no means does that mean you have to leave. Feel free to stick around and just hang out with me. That's cool. So Jim Henson's Labyrinth, Coronation. I think this is a collector's edition. This is 3 different volumes, and they're very heavy. I don't know if I want to continue holding all of them, but I'll hold them for a little while. We have volume 1 with this beautiful cover. We have volume 2 with probably my favorite cover because pink. And then we have volume 3 with this more dramatic type pose. I'm actually going to continue holding up this edition because this is my favorite. But this is the story of how Jareth possibly became Goblin King. It takes place during the original movie storyline. So you have Sarah, who is running the labyrinth to get Toby back, and then you have Jareth, who has Toby and is trying to entertain him. During one of Toby's crying sessions, Jareth starts to tell him a tale about another runner of the labyrinth and a baby such as himself. I liked this story, not necessarily because it's the possibility of Jareth's backstory. It was more of some of the parallels that this story started to pull between the movie and this additional runner. You got to see how the labyrinth changed according to whoever was interacting with it at the time. And it had a lot of parallels between Sarah's story and the runner here. I liked picking up those pieces, and I liked the additional characters that they started throwing in for this story. I will say there are probably a lot of people who would pick this up and say that it feels a lot like fan fiction, and possibly that is because it is taking the original story and adding more to it. For me, I have lived in the fan fiction world of this series for so very long. I actually started out in that world before I even saw the movie. That's a whole nother story that I won't get into here. But this just kind of tickled a spot in my soul that I didn't know I needed. I love the artwork. All of it is really very well colored and illustrated. It's just, I really, really enjoyed it. Now, I will say that volume 1 and volume 2, I enjoyed a little bit more because we started seeing other parts of the movie. So we got that supplemental material. So I liked those pieces a lot more than I ended up liking volume 3, the conclusion of how possibly Jareth came to be. It leaves it, okay, it kind of closes the story, but it also leaves it up a little bit to interpretation. And that is a little bit of what the labyrinth is. You start to realize that this whole thing is a little bit of whatever is made of it through the minds of those who are there. And so the story, throughout the story, Jareth is always talking about the difference between truth and finding what matters. And sometimes it's the truth that is sinking to the bottom and not what is supposed to be coming to your mind, to your forefront. That's not the purpose of the tale. And so some of that was interwoven in the telling of Jareth's coronation and what all of that meant. The last couple pages, I don't necessarily know how I feel about them. I don't dislike them. It feels like in the third one, some of the persona, especially at the end of some of the characters, such as Jareth and the goblin he's interacting with throughout this whole series, it shifts in a really weird way because they wanted it to mean something that the beginning wasn't necessarily pulling through. it did a little bit, but all of a sudden it just escalated very quickly and it didn't feel natural. But otherwise, I truly enjoyed this whole series. I am glad I managed to find this. I didn't even know it existed for, I just randomly one day, all of a sudden it's like, here, this is a thing. Where have you been all my life? Apparently hiding from me. So if you do like the Labyrinth movie and you love playing around with those supplemental materials, I highly recommend picking this up. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Keep an open mind when you read things like this, that sometimes it may not necessarily fall into your version of what the story was being told in the original, but this one I think does a pretty good job. So this is the point in which I'm going to start going into some more spoiled filled thoughts. So if you don't want to spoil yourself for the contents of this read, I highly recommend that you go and pick it up and read it and come back and talk to me, because I need people who are totally into this franchise to talk to me about it, because sometimes I feel alone. I am probably one of the biggest Labyrinth fans. I have 2 doors over next to me that have the Knockers replicas from the movie on them. That's just how much of a fan I am. So I was a little leery when I started out into the series of what this might do to the characters that I didn't necessarily agree with, because I had built them up in my mind in such a way that sometimes when you fan about something like that so much and you've personified a lot of these characters, and then all of a sudden you got this new material that comes in, it doesn't quite fit. Here, I think it does a pretty good job of continuing the story and filling it out a little bit more, especially, like I said, the first 2, where we start to see a little bit of Jareth's mother and how Jareth as a babe might have come into the labyrinth and what that means. It's the ending, like I said, that I struggled with a little bit, because we have this old owl king who is not a good person, and the labyrinth he ran was pretty much the polar opposite of the one that Jareth is running. It was about order and cleanliness, whereas Jareth is just disorder and chaos, and that works for the goblins. What I don't know how I feel about this is the goblin that took care of both Jareth as a baby and was taking care of Toby as a baby, and how he started interacting with the story and this very sentimental feeling he started to impose on the story at the very end, where he's like, I just wanted you to be happy. I just wanted you to be okay. You don't need the babe. Repeating of history was in the forefront of his mind, which I found a little bit interesting, because technically this goblin only spent 13 hours with Jareth as a baby. And then after his mother walked through the clock and became part of the whole system, Jareth came out fully formed. And that, I mean, I guess you can form an attachment that quickly. It feels, that kind of emotionalness from a goblin seems a little weird. I don't know. It wasn't weird. There were points where it kind of made sense in my mind, but there was something a little bit off about it. And then the way Jareth at the end walks back into the clock and interacts with his parents, I almost didn't want it. I almost wanted it to be left more open-ended than that. Like, well, how do you think I happened kind of concept. But I suppose they decided to do what they decided to do, and that it will not make me dislike this series as a whole. I very much liked Tangle. Tangle's very much fun. I loved reading their character. And then you have the worm. I am so glad that the worm got added into the story. The worm, I don't think, had enough screen time in the movie. Them as a whole, love them. And then you had some parallels with the archetypes that joined Sarah that also seem to have joined Jareth's mother. So you had the first character that they met was a character who was conflicted about who they are and betrayed them in some way along the storyline. And then you have the second character who is a little bit of a beast because they don't understand their own strengths, in which, say, you have a rose bush who always wants to cuddle and you don't quite understand that. And then you have a rock caller who ultimately could crush you in a single blow, but is a gentle giant. And then you've got that final character. You've got the one that is fighting for a cause, or who wants to fight for a cause, and is just all gung-ho and pushing forward and keeping the story going. So it's kind of interesting that all of those same types of characters ended up with both runners. And maybe that's how the labyrinth works. You end up, if you run it right, you end up with those kind of connections. And I kind of liked seeing that and making some of those connections. And I don't know, it just seems fun. Now, I do have a manga story that is called Return to the Labyrinth, which I believe involves Toby in the labyrinth. I don't know how I feel about it yet. It is going to be my next read. I'm gonna kind of dive into that. So if you want to see that, of course, subscribe, hit the bell to get all of those notifications. And I would also love to hear your thoughts on this series or just on the Labyrinth franchise in general. I don't care. I want to hear your thoughts. Tell me down below. And of course, I heart you beautiful faces. Bye.